Hey everyone, and welcome to the 7th episode of our Needle Devlog. This time I'm going to talk about our new 4.4 release, a new FAQ section that we added to our website that hopefully answers a lot of questions, and multi-language support for our documentation, which will surely make it easier for many of our international users. So let's dive right in. The latest public release is Needle Engine 4.4. So this is available now if you upgrade your web project or if you upgrade from within the Unity integration. And there have been a lot of exciting new things in this release. One thing that will come in handy is that we improved a lot of the attributes that the Needle Engine web component exposes to make it easier to adjust common settings like context shadows of your scene, exposure, tone mapping, and so on. And a number of these attributes are now easier to use or have more complete ways of setting them up. So for example, context shadows can now be used to adjust how strong the context shadows are. And the Needle Engine web component supports transparency now, which means that if you want to integrate it seamlessly into a web page, you can now tell the Needle Engine component, hey, you're transparent and your website will basically shine through it. Of course, we also have documentation for which attributes do what on the Needle Engine web component. And you can, as always, find this in our docs. There's an entire table for seeing which attribute does what. So like the source attribute, the core one for loading files, but also rendering specific ones for background colors, background images, blurriness, environment, all these kind of things. And there's also a bunch of settings for interaction, like if you want to autoplay animations, which kind of camera controls you want to use. And for those of you with a Pro license, you can, of course, also customize the entire loading display, like which logo is used, what text is there, which colors are used, to make it fit the brand that you're creating with. Another change that we did is improving our ObjectUtils. ObjectUtils is the API to create various types of primitives that you may need in your app, in your procedural game, and so on. We added scale support. I showed this in an earlier devlog when we were talking about the beta updates. And we have a little example here, a scene that is comprised of many different primitives. And you can see our ObjectUtils API in use here. If you hover on something, then you can see the documentation for it. And the new thing here is that the API also supports scale now for all kinds of different primitives, of course. Another very useful change is the addition of LookAtScreenPoint. This is a helper method that makes whatever object you're applying it to look at your cursor, for example, if you want that, or look at a different point on your screen. And here's a sample for that, where we have two eyeballs that follow my cursor as I move it over the screen. And this is as easy as, in this case, having a component that is applied to both of these eye objects that calls the LookAtScreenPoint method to look at the current pointer position, which is my mouse cursor. So this is nice for adding light interactions where you want to have parts of your scene react to what the cursor is doing. Of course, it doesn't need to be as obvious as eyes looking at the cursor. It can also be supple rotations on objects and so on. So we can change this to a lower value here. And then the amount that they will follow the cursor is less. Or we change this to a higher number. And now we can see that they go a little bit crazy and follow the cursor much more directly. Another very useful change is that we adjusted how our default lighting works. So typically when you want to make a nicely lit scene with Needle Engine, then you're providing an HDR or EXR image, a high dynamic range image that is used as IBL, which means image-based lighting. And so far, you always had to provide this environment image so that your scene has any lighting at all. If you're using the Unity or Blender integrations, then this is done automatically for you. But when you're using the web component, you had no lighting at all in these cases. So what we did is now we have a default environment that is applied whenever you don't have a custom environment map specified. And this is how it looks. Here we have a scene that does not have any lighting provided on the Needle Engine attribute. but still shows nice reflections on metallic and not metallic objects so that you can get good default lighting out of the box. We also did a couple of nice changes to our networking implementation. For example, our trusty SyncedTransform component now supports scale synchronization as well, which is great if you have multiplayer XR apps, for example, and people just scaling objects and putting them into place. So this is synchronized as well by default now. And there's a new method on SyncedTransform to free ownership. So ownership, if you're not aware of that, is a core concept in our networking implementation, which basically means that objects that use ownership know which player they currently belong to. So only that player may be able to do interactions on them or call methods on it and so on. And that's what ownership is for. And SyncedTransform by default transfers ownership when someone else grabs an object. So basically, when I'm grabbing an object, I'm gaining ownership of that. When someone else grabs that object, then ownership is automatically transferred to that person by default. If you don't want that, like you want to be able to lock objects to one player, you can turn that off. And then you'll use this new method for free ownership to basically give the object back into the pool, and then anyone can gain ownership of it again. There have also been graphics changes, reflection probes now automatically collect which objects they apply to, which is nice. And one more option to control resolution on mobile devices. Needle Engine has always supported the devicePixelRatio option, which means that on devices that have very high density, like a Retina display on iOS or also most modern Android phones, you get the correct resolution for your content using the device pixel ratio that the device supplies. But in some cases, you may want to override this, especially if you're on a super high density screen with a very complex scene. You may want to lower the effective resolution so that rendering is faster. And you can do that now. We're exposing device pixel ratio on the Needle Engine renderer now to override how that works. There have also been a lot of fixes, large and small, some applying to XR, some applying to scene switcher, orbit controls, and so on. As always, you can read the entire list on GitHub in our release notes section, and the link is, of course, also at the bottom of this video. There have also been a number of changes. For example, our licensing server should now be faster. We're now automatically hiding the Needle logo when you're using a Pro license. At this point, I want to thank everyone who got a Pro license so far. This is really great. It means a lot to us. We changed a bit how auto-target of orbit controls works. If you're not aware of that, auto-target is a property on orbit controls that's on by default, and that makes it easier for people to navigate a scene. And I can show an example of that. Here we have a little car, and by default, our orbit controls just rotates around the center of the scene. But we can always double-click on a part of the scene to reset our focus of attention, and then we'll rotate around this point. And what auto-target does is when I pan the camera, for example, let's pan it over here, then auto-target will automatically find a good point for the camera to rotate around. And this is nice because it makes navigation around the scene easier. So you can see that by just panning around the object, I can basically move around quite naturally and look at different parts of this model. And of course, if I'm done with that, I can always double click on the background to set everything back to the original center point. We also did cool improvements to our Unity integration. We're now adding a default dependency on Draco, KTX, and Meshopt, which means that compressed GLTF assets, such as from Needle Cloud, will work out of the box in your Needle projects. And I'll show a demo of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this asset into our Unity project as a Needle Cloud asset and export it to the web again. So let's head into Unity. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an empty object here, called it asset1, add a Needle Cloud asset component, and this takes a URL to an asset that's on Needle Cloud. And to get this on our cloud page, we go to share, link this asset into my app. You could also send it to someone for viewing right in the browser, embed it in a website, and so on. But what we want to do here is we want to link it, which means that whenever the asset on cloud is updated, the one that's used in the app will be updated automatically as well. So let's copy this link here back to Unity. And when we put this URL in here, we're getting the car displayed right here. So this is what Needle Cloud assets do. They basically pull content from cloud into your project. So let's align the camera a little bit. So if we save this now and go back to the browser, then we can see, oh, cool, our cloud asset is now here. And the interesting part is, it's not actually in the build of the application. It is still referenced from cloud. So let's repeat this for one of the other assets here. Gonna get this writing ball, use the share button, link into my app, copy link, and we can duplicate our asset here, put in the URL, and there we go. Last but not least, I want to talk about cool changes to our website and documentation. So first of all, on the Needle Cloud homepage, we now have a FAQ section at the end of the page. So we tried to consolidate a lot of the questions that have been asked about Needle so far and our answers to them, like what is it that we're actually doing? Why is this better than some other platform? How does pricing work? Are you guys compliant with GDPR and all that kind of stuff? So this is now in this FAQ section here. You can jump to specific areas here faster and then read through these questions and answers. And in many places, we also have links to more content specific to this question. Like here, this question is about networking because we're being asked a lot, can I make multiplayer games with Needle? And the answer is, of course, yes. And then there's a little bit of explanation and a link right into the networking documentation. And if this section here does not answer some of your questions, we also added our Needle Assistant at the top so that you can ask your questions directly here, and we're gonna try answering them with our AI assistant that has been trained on our documentation, all the website content, the samples, and so on. So this will probably get you a good answer, and if not, please go to our forum or drop us a mail so that we can give you an answer to your questions. The other cool change is that our entire documentation has now been translated into multiple languages. And this is very easy. You would just go to languages at the top and then select the language you want to see the documentation in. And we support a number of languages right now. Please let us know if you would like to see this in a specific language. We heard especially a lot about students that are more comfortable learning about Needle in their native tongue. And this is why we started this endeavor of translating our documentation. So if something is missing here, please let us know, and we can see if we can add that. I also want to highlight a really cool project from our community that we've shared on our social media. This Future of Mobility project by Prefrontal Cortex, a great agency that has done a lot of different projects with Needle already, is combining screen-based information and XR into like a really nice experience package. And it's been used for public participation and getting people to understand how their city may change, what new mobility options are there. So it's an all-around awesome project. If you want to see your project featured on our social media, please let us know. We're continually adding more things to our showcase section to show the world what cool projects are being made with Needle. And we're proud of you, and we would love to showcase your projects, so please let us know so that we can talk about them more. That's it for this week's update. Thanks for listening in, and feel free to drop a comment if you want to see specific areas covered or if you have questions or things you would like to learn more about. You can also subscribe to not miss future updates, and see you next time.